Should the UK rave scene be preparing for a potential opioid problem? As a journalist who specialises in recreational drug use and also electronic music culture, it's a question that I get asked a lot. And I've been asked it more than ever this week because of events that took place in Queensland, Australia a few days ago. There was a health warning there recently because a man died after taking these yellow pills. It's a popular ecstasy press. They also had the letter Y embossed on the back. And the health warning concerned people a lot because we don't actually have the information of whether the person who died intended to take ecstasy or if he was missold ecstasy. But because this is a popular ecstasy press, people think that that might have been the case. The pills contained two types of nitazenes, which are synthetic opioids, incredibly strong, incredibly dangerous. And these drugs were found in the toxicology reports of the man who tragically died, but also in the pills themselves. The Australian Federal Police said that the party drug supply, they mentioned the cocaine and the MDMA or ecstasy, may contain synthetic opioids. And that's exactly what people are worried about in the UK, which is why I constantly get asked this. And I can say that that hasn't happened yet in the UK. There's been no evidence or no testing of any synthetic opioids in what I refer to as the party drug supply. And I'm talking about drugs like ketamine, coke, ecstasy, methadone, the drugs that people often take along with alcohol in and around electronic music culture. But that doesn't mean that we haven't got synthetic opioids in the UK. We do have synthetic opioids in the UK, but they're more sort of contaminating the heroin supply or the black market benzos. So people buying Valium, or also known as diazepam or Xanax, on the black market. We've seen deaths from that, and we've seen an increase in deaths from opioids. Deaths following opioid use in England and Wales have nearly doubled in the last decade. And now researchers are saying that there's actually potentially a problem in the way that we've recorded them deaths, and the deaths are actually likely to be thousands more than we anticipated. But that's deaths from people that take opioids or benzos. And these synthetic opioids have come into the UK really since the Taliban banned poppy production, and that was in April 2022. They banned poppy production, and eventually the heroin started getting less and less pure in the UK and started being swapped by synthetic opioids. They then have found their ways into the benzo supply. Thank God they have not found their way into the party drug supply in the UK yet. It's not happened yet. It's the worst case scenario. But is it something that people on the electronic music scene should be aware of or should be preparing for? Well, according to 𝙤𝙧𝙪𝙜, the senior policy analyst at Transform Drug Policy Foundation, yes. He recently wrote about the incident in Australia in a LinkedIn post. It's long been suggested that something like this could happen. It's always seemed unlikely that synthetic opioids would spread from adulterated heroin and benzos to enter the supply chain for party drugs. And the reason that he says this is, number one, the synthetic opioids don't mimic the effects of the party drugs, like for instance cocaine or ecstasy. And the other thing is what a bad business model it would be for the dealers to give the customers what they don't want, and something that's extremely dangerous that's very likely to kill them. But even if it was a mistake or a terrible miscalculation, Steve wrote, by a small-time rogue producer, these things can happen, and even if rare, they will happen increasingly often as synthetic opioids flood the supply chains. They remain both horrific tragedies and entirely avoidable. He went on to write, when someone dies from synthetic opioids that are adulterating or missold as ecstasy in the UK, and it's only a matter of time, it's important to be clear that there was no need for this to happen. They are avoidable, that's what Steve is saying, because the government could, number one, they could legalise the trade of drugs like ecstasy. If they did, then that would pretty much get rid of this contaminated drug issue overnight. It wouldn't make ecstasy completely safe because there's obviously some dangers with any drug. But it would stop this specific problem of contaminated ecstasy and people getting a drug that they don't want, or they don't know what they're taking, or they can't actually employ harm reduction methods because they don't know what they're getting. And the British government do not allow that. So if the government don't want to solve the problem by legalising the trade of drugs like ecstasy, then if that's too radical for them, then one thing they could do, which would be much more simple, would be to allow drug checking services. Drug checking services are when someone who uses party drugs can go and have their drugs tested in a lab situation, and they will be told the contents of the drugs, and they will also be given a sort of short intervention with professionals, and potentially life-saving harm reduction advice would be administered to the drug user, highly tailored to their particular needs. But now, you know, the government used to allow little bits of that. You used to be able to get it at certain festivals years ago, but in recent years, they've completely banned that. So it's not allowed to get your party drugs checked in sort of nightclubs or festivals or town centres, stuff like that. Now, drug checking is not to be confused with drug testing. Drug testing is allowed. That's when the police have confiscated drugs, or paramedics have been handed drugs, or security guards at festivals have found them on the floor, or they've been put in amnesty bins, and they can be tested, but that's drug testing. Drug checking is when you can go and get your drugs tested to find out what's in them. So what options are available to people who use party drugs in the UK? Well, it's quite limited. They can get a reagent testing kit, which will give a good indication as to certain substances in the drugs, or you could post it to WEDINOS, which is a Welsh government service. If you post it to them, fill out a form, send it several weeks in advance, and eventually they will publish the results on their website. But it's quite a lengthy and time-consuming process that most people will not do, or won't get the chance to do it in time before the sesh. If you're interested, if you want to use the WEDINOS service, I have written a step-by-step guide. It was published in The Face. I'll pop that in the description below. In Queensland, the government in Australia actually banned drug checking shortly before this tragic incident where this guy died from taking the yellow teddy bear pills.
Queensland has become the first state to ban pill testing.
We hope that this doesn't happen with the party drugs, but we know it's a possibility as more and more synthetic opioids come into the country. We know that this is going to be a potential threat. Why don't we prepare? Why don't we allow people taking party drugs to check their drugs, find out what's in them, or even better, regulate the trade? Because it's a choice now that the government has. Let's hope that they make the right one, because at the moment, by taking away these safety nets whilst knowing that there's an emerging threat, it's very difficult to look at it as not an extremely bad decision on the government's part. I mean, there's other ways that electronic music culture can prepare, you know. Naloxone is a drug that can reverse an opioid overdose. Maybe some of the staff in nightclubs are starting to sort of get training on that now. But ultimately, the government does need to, allow drug checking, because we know we've got an emerging threat and we are not doing anything to mitigate that threat. You know, it's a bit like COVID. We don't bother getting the PPE until there's already a pandemic. Well, why don't we just put the things in place? We hope that this doesn't happen, but if it does, let's prepare just in case. Let's allow drug checking and let's get it rolled out. Festivals, town centres, nightclubs, let's do the right thing. But the government cannot say, if this happens, that they didn't know about this, because experts have been warning them for 2 or 3 years now to allow this, and instead they're actually reducing the amount of drug checking that's allowed. So it's a very tricky situation. If you find these videos useful or interesting, do me a favor, subscribe, click the bell notification. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next one.